Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dave Belanger. I am the Chief Security Officer at Bestow Life Insurance. If you've never heard of Bestow, it's an interesting business. They have a completely digital platform. It's 100% online, and I've never seen anything like it. You can get a term life insurance policy in about 5 minutes. It does everything completely digital. So that's our business, and I'm going to take a moment just to thank Jessica and Raymond, who last minute agreed to sit on the panel, so thank you very much. We just saw them in the audience, and we said, hey, you come on.
So we have no idea what we're talking about today.
Right. We greatly appreciate it.
But it'll be so much fun, we promise.
It will. So with that, let's start with Raymond, and I'm going to ask all the panelists just to introduce themselves, name, title, company, and maybe a little bit about what your company does.
Okay. Hopefully you can hear me. Raymond King. I am the Director of Security for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm sure everyone's heard of that company. I've been there for about 5 months, and it's been certainly an exciting journey so far. First for everything, first combine, first draft, just watching the team sort of get prepared for the season is super exciting. I'm an old IT guy, right? Computer science background. I've been mostly in the pharmaceutical industry my career, and I've had multiple roles, including developer, architect, moving into governance, risk, and compliance about 8 years ago, and really just being able to provide value to organizations by focusing on risk, ensuring that they're doing the right things, and that we can continue to meet the needs of our stakeholders. So super exciting to participate in that at the Cowboys, but also looking forward to this discussion. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jessica Nimmers. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Elevate Credit. So we are a fintech company. So we do a lot of the software development and partner with our lending institutions. So we do decision management and really focus on the non-prime and prime-ish market. So we're offering a lot of alternatives for lending for people who really need it for the middle class. So we're really excited about our mission. I've been there for 2 years. I was actually in manufacturing for 10 and a half before that, which is also a passion of mine. I'm one of the only people that loves IT/OT security, but it's really exciting. So, and before that, I was a professional ballerina, so I was not a computer science person. I am the ballerina turned CISO, so that's how I'm known, but I'm really excited to join this panel, and I will be in another panel with some of my fellow women in tech at 1 o'clock today, so we'll see you back then.
Thank you. Travis?
Yeah, and I'm Travis Farrell, the Chief Information Security Officer for Archaea Energy. We're a renewable natural gas company, which may not mean anything to a lot of people, but what we do is we harness methane off of landfills. That's our thing. So it's a new business for me. I have history in energy and IT/OT, like Jessica, coming from XTO Energy in Fort Worth and ExxonMobil. So this is very different, as I've figured out since I started last summer. Similar, but very, very different business model. So it's been really fun kind of getting up to speed on that.
Very cool.
All right, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Kirby, CISO for Interstate Batteries. I've been there for about 7 years, been in this role for about 2 years, and we have a purpose and value-driven company. Our purpose is to glorify God and enrich lives and deliver the most trustworthy source of power to the world. So it's a really cool business model that we have, and a really cool product that we have, really great batteries and for cars and marine and RVs and whatnot. And so I've been doing that for a while. I guess my fun fact is sort of like Jessica's the ballerina CISO. I'm the rock and roll CISO. I play rock and roll music in a rock band when I'm not doing this kind of stuff for a living. So it's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. I love it. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for those that are watching virtually. We appreciate your attendance so much. A little bit of house cleaning. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today. The opinions are that the discussion that we have is our opinions and don't reflect those of our employers. And then the other thing is, I have a lot of questions here, but we would like to get your feedback. So I will, if you have a question about something specific for a specific panelist, raise your hand. though I'll warn you, I probably will only, depending on how long you talk, I will only take 1 or 2 questions, just so that we can keep things moving and try to get all of the subject matter today. So with that, let's go ahead and kick things off. One of the first questions is, I'd like to hear from Raymond. Can you talk a little bit about your process for assessing, quantifying, and addressing risk, just from the total business perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a lot that goes into it. So coming from a heavily regulated environment in the pharmaceutical industry, it's a completely different discussion than I've seen, for example, in sports and entertainment. Certainly in pharma, you're talking about people's health. You're talking about the drugs that they take, the procedures you're performing, devices you're inserting into their body. So it's really just making sure that you're complying with FDA regulations, because that's really where the risk management framework comes from. In the context of an organization, a commercial organization, it looks entirely different, because you really have to understand, number one, what are the needs of your stakeholders? What information, for example, in today's world, it's largely about how do we protect our customers' information, our partners' information, and whether that's PHI or PII or it's PCI, credit card data, you really have to understand what is the potential impact on your organization if you lose that data, and cost of breach, fines, et cetera. But just in general terms, in today's world, we talk a lot about resilience and business continuity, because ransomware is a huge threat for all of us, as we heard in the previous session. So it's really getting the business to focus or decide what is the most important thing to them, and where should we apply our limited resources to protecting the organization. I say that we historically, we IT, have done maybe not such a great job of quantifying risks. I think back 8 years when I first started, we had a lot of charts that were red, yellow, green, or red, amber, green, depending on where you were working in the world. So it was sort of this qualitative statement about what the risk is. And I think today we've got more information that helps us to quantify that, whether it's the FAIR method, factor analysis of information risk, or it's just having better data sets that tell us, here's the cost of breach. I was reading the Verizon data breach investigative report a couple of days ago. It really tells you by industry what we've seen. What is the average cost of breach? What's the high number? So I think today we have better information that we can use to have those discussions with the board or with senior management that says, in case of breach, this is what you can expect. Because I think for most of us, that's the greatest challenge, because the question you're going to be asked is, what if I don't spend any money on this? What happens? What's the likelihood that it's going to happen? Well, not really sure. Today, I think we've got better information. So as risk professionals or cybersecurity professionals, we can have better conversations with our stakeholders. Yeah.
Jessica, do you want to opine on that?
Yeah, so I can kind of say what he said. No, but yeah, so really looking at, we always look at the likelihood too. We're focused on that. If you're in a budget crunch, which the hardest thing I always talk about with cybersecurity spend, it's the fence. And if I asked each of you the return on investment on the fence in your backyard, and you'll say, I'm not sure how good it is, or we spend $11,000 on the fence. I don't know what we're getting for it. But the one time that the fence stops a kid from coming into your backyard and drowning in your pool, your fence is very valuable. And so for years, I've been trying to upsell, not only the risk in the investment and then tying the investment back into risk. So we are looking at that. And sometimes we have to say, is this a $100,000 risk or is it a $50,000 risk? So that's where we start to really quantify and prioritize, because at the end of the day, we've got to figure out where we're going to spend our dollars and our resources. And again, the most likely damage from something risky is kind of how we work with risk management in that aspect.
This?
Really a job of covering a lot of ground on this topic. I'm trying to think of, for me, it's just really understanding what is important to the business. And I think that kind of goes back to what Raymond started with, because he had 2 different contexts from his history to apply that to. And I've recently had to do this, having changed jobs over to a new industry and everything. And things that I assumed coming in were actually very different than what I was used to coming from ExxonMobil. So there's a lot of just spending time with the business, understanding what's important to them, how they work and how they operate, because sometimes they can't articulate things that you can pick out, like, okay, so what happens if this breaks, And they're like, oh, that would be really bad, but it wasn't something that they told you about when you asked them what's really important in your environment. So I think just having those conversations is super, super valuable. And you can usually, once you had those conversations, you can go back and you can really lay out like, okay, I have a much better understanding of what's important here, what we need to circle the wagons around, what other things, maybe are less of a priority, kind of to Jess's point, where, there's prioritization, but there's also like, what's the likelihood of this actually happening? Or do we have other mitigating controls in place that, to protect other things that kind of come into play for this? And, at the end of the day, a lot of times once you get down to this, here's the stuff I need to do, it's all the usual stuff that we have to do anyway, right? So it's just, kind of adding a little bit of practical, my own practical experience from the last year or so into the mix.
Very good. Well, I know one thing I personally like to do is business impact assessment, and I don't do it myself either. If I can avoid it, I'll bring somebody in and have them interview the business and kind of dig out this information that we're talking about getting from the business to assess it. One of the issues that you run into a lot of times is different areas. IT certainly has resources that are extensively outsourced, or you're working in a more of an offshore model. So I guess, Jeff, my question is, do you have strategies to minimize risk when you are working in a more of an offshore outsourced model?
Yeah, I do. I think it can be really challenging because you're working with folks who you don't know, who aren't in your direct line of sight most of the time, being offshore and whatnot. And I think it's important to look at those vendors when you're starting to do business with them up front, especially offshore, and find those that absolutely complement or work well with whatever your company purpose and values is. If your company doesn't have a strong purpose and values suite, then I would suggest you get with the leadership team and build one, because that can be a really important aspect in order to govern those relationships, to assure that the resources that offshore type of organization brings to the table can not only gel with what your company's about, but also speak the language between what your IT people on site do and say versus what they might be used to, because a lot of those companies work with lots of different companies, and it's important to make sure that you can sync that up as much as you possibly can. Yes?
I'm trying to keep an eye out for hands going up.
Yeah, great question. And it is not, there is no magic bullet for that. It is very challenging. What I find the best thing to do is to make sure that your leadership, and you actually, really everybody that can, when you're engaging with offshore vendors, that you all are speaking the same language, and to help drive the ideas of what's important and what you're needing to get out of them. Use your own company lingo where you can, so that these folks will develop it, and try to engage them as much as possible in with your own organization to help them absolutely feel like they're a part. I've seen situations to where sometimes folks treat this offshore, let's say, as not an extension to my company, but just a group of folks that I'm never going to meet, and they're doing something that I, for one reason or another, don't want to staff internally. I think that's a bad way to handle that. You need to engage those folks, and as much as your contract will allow, make them be a part of your organization as much as possible. it doesn't happen overnight, but I have seen over a period of about a year, if you're talking the talk and you're walking the walk with those folks, they will start picking up on what's important to your company as a culture, and it just helps everybody to work a little bit better together.
Does anybody else have any opinions on outsourcing, offshoring, working with? I know in my experience, you have to kind of keep an eye on them sometimes. There's a tendency to ignore some basic hygiene when you're not sitting in the same building with those people, and they're trying to accomplish tasks, meeting a deadline that you gave out, and they'll take shortcuts and things like that. So it's definitely something that you have to monitor.
I think that there's a couple of dimensions that you have to think about up front as you're making the case for actually doing this, right? And a lot depends, from a culture perspective, Jeff, I think a lot depends on whether or not these resources will be customer-facing, or are they purely interfacing with, let's say, with the IT organization? Because you might have different requirements depending on what that looks like, right? So certain standards that you want to make sure your customers feel as though this is a seamless experience. It's no different than if they were talking to someone who is onshore. But I also think that you have to be very careful in terms of negotiating your contracts. So some organizations have, depending on where it is in the world, some have captive employees and others basically use, contractors, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. And the cost of actually ramping up a new person and plugging them in can really impact your service levels. So I think you have to be very clear in your contracts what your expectation is in terms of they bear the cost of bringing people up to speed before they hit the seat. Otherwise, that can impact you. So those are some of the things you really have to dig into, which aren't necessarily related to culture per se, but it's really just about, are you getting the value that you've promised to the business when you said we're going to go with a strategy?
Well, and it's interesting because the landscape changed drastically with COVID. And it used to be, all of us would sit in a building. Most of us here would go to an office and sit in the building with the people we work with, and then you say, oh yeah, that group of people that we've outsourced to, they're in India or they're overseas or whatever. Yeah. But now with the distributed work from home model, things have changed, and we're, in a lot of cases we're all remote. So Jessica, how have you changed your security strategy to address that new threat landscape?
Yeah, so I think being very intentional on what data is being exchanged. We're a data-driven company being fintech. So I could speak to how life changed so dramatically for a manufacturing company, but for a fintech company, we're a software development shop. So I think it was really, we had been so used to the collaboration person to person, but the model itself we could have done from anywhere. But then we started really looking at how are we securing the data within our house, because our house is now in 600 houses around. So really looking at more at the perimeter. We're focused on cloud, so we're connecting to so many other providers too. That traditional firewall model where we had the firewalls and we had the rules and everything was really tight within the office is no more. So we really had to go to more, SD-WAN, Zero Trust, and really looking at how VPN was working for us too. So it almost felt at first that we were too locked down, but that was our first step, is just to get everybody locked down. So that way, when you are connecting on your laptop from your home, we're not subject to any of the other poor hygiene that might be going on in your home. And then we also had to really look at who else was connecting to your Wi-Fi during that time. Suddenly we had 3 other kids gaming and doing heaven knows what while we're trying to connect to that same Wi-Fi. So then we did some education for our employees also, and just really focused on securing their homes to help us secure our infrastructure too.
Stu, do you think that the work from home infrastructure can be equally as secure as the centralized office model was?
I think so for us, but I would not say that for every industry. I can't imagine healthcare or pharmaceutical where you are there. And again, I know for my friends, because I had just departed the manufacturing company, that company was not geared at all to a work from home model. So I know they had to get really creative, and a lot of us had not used, video. We had Link or we had Teams. Teams was just coming out, right, when the pandemic hit. So for the Microsoft shop folks out there, we didn't use video because it ate up bandwidth. Well, now we're all using video again on everyone's bandwidth. So, but trying to continue to collaborate and work in that same manner definitely took some quick thinking and creativity and a lot of education.
Yep, I agree. And Travis, how has work from home changed your work life?
So I was already working from home, so it didn't change a whole lot for me personally, but the businesses that I've supported during this time over the last couple of years have definitely gone through some, changes, from manufacturing. So I did virtual CISO work before moving into the role that I'm at now. So I got to experience, lots of different environments during that time. And they were all in various states of, hey, we're actually not that far off. We're just going to do these quick things, and we think we're actually pretty good to support the remote workforce. Whereas the other organizations were completely not in any way, right? They didn't have the WAN circuits to be able to have everybody in the company VPN in and all this. So there was definitely some tap dancing that went on to try to figure out alternative SaaS-based solutions and things like that. But ultimately, I think just kind of hit on the high points. You're going to be coming in from hostile networks. People are going to be working from wherever. It might be home, might be Starbucks, might be wherever, might be a hotel. This isn't drastically different than the way that people work when they travel anyway, so there already should be some controls in place for that stuff. But it's just kind of ramping it all up and thinking about really the data. Some of the biggest tools that have helped me personally in this, because I'm in a completely remote company right now. It have been DLP, being able to control the actual files, the stuff that's really important. Different other email protections and things being able to have visibility on the endpoints. So I'm very thankful for having an EDR solution on all the endpoints. Even when they work from home, I have visibility. I can see what happened. I can see where they're what websites they're going to and what's going on, and not necessarily from a control perspective. We control the things that we need to, being able to use Intune, for instance, to say that these applications are not allowed to print, just simple things like that. And then knowing that the files are locked down with the DLP, and then being able to, kind of let them work at that point, but then have the visibility when I need it. If something kind of trips a red flag somewhere, I can, we have all the telemetry. We can see what's happening, and if we need to take extra steps, we've got processes, to be able to go in and take care of that remotely or whatever. So that's kind of the gamut in a nutshell, I guess.
And we have a question, I think, from yes, sir.
Yeah.
How do you baseline? Do you walk in as a CISO, or any of you walk into a new environment, right? I just got a new job as a CISO or a CEO.
Right.
Where do I start, right? What's the technique that you use to baseline?
That's a great
Can we
question.
repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, when you start a new role as a CISO or a vCISO, what's the baseline you use?
Yeah, how do you baseline? I know for me, when I joined Elevate, Travis was my baseline. So it was great. If there's any way that you can talk to your predecessor as you're coming in, it's a wonderful way. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Thanks
That
again.
was very convenient.
Yeah,
by the way.
that
I was
that worked out
hey,
well. So
friend.
thank you
Yeah.
again. Yeah.
So when I was doing the virtual CISO stuff, my favorite thing was to go in and just, hey, can we do a NIST CSF as kind of, that's where we're going to baseline everything. And I would go walk them through that whole process and usually lift out a whole bunch of stuff that, like, hey, here's the key things we need to focus on for this year. Here's where we want to go next year, based on what comes out of that CSF, cybersecurity framework. Some companies, they're already pretty mature, and they may already have like, oh, hey, we're already like, we're NIST 853 all the way already. Do you want to see all our documentation? Great. Let me go through what policies you have. Let me see what show me your risk register. It's just you kind of have to take it, based on the maturity of the organization, but. In a lot of cases, I would step in and they really didn't have much, so I would just be like, okay, hey, you know what? Let's just take what you got, but let's go ahead and go do this whole the CSF and go from there. And the companies, I still stay in touch with some of them. That they really appreciated that process. They've continued on since I've long since left, and that's what I would suggest. I think the CSF is flexible enough that you can kind of use that as a great tool to baseline an organization if they're not that mature.
And I think one other way of looking at this is that if you work for an organization that has been audited or is subject to compliance requirements, regulations, whatever it is, in some cases that's the catalyst for you being hired in the first place. Mm-hmm. There was a massive failure, someone got breached, or they're just not meeting the mark. So you're walking into an environment that has already identified some of those gaps and deficiencies, which is great. But yeah, if you're coming into an organization net new, taking the responsibility to sort of do the assessments and speaking to the business. Because in a lot of cases, the business, even though they may not want to accept, they do understand the challenges or the issues that they face, as in they're not meeting the mark, they're not protecting customer data, they don't have redundancy on their critical systems, they don't have a business continuity plan. So I think a lot of those things you can gather through an interview process, talking to the business. But like I said, if you have an existing risk register or you have existing assessments or audits that show the deficiencies, then that makes life a lot easier for you.
And I kind of look to, like, if you're going to another doctor for a second opinion, they'll say, bring all your films with you. So I look at the blood work. I'm going to say, give me pen test results. What was your last pen test? What's your last security assessment? So I'd kind of look for things that look like blood work as you're coming in, just to literally know the health of the organization that you're about to take on to. Yes.
Is there another question?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, internal and external pen testing results. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually on week 2 as the new CSO at Bestow, and it has been drinking from the fire hose, consuming every piece of documentation that they have, and that essentially is how I'm going to lay the groundwork for the 3-year strategy or the 3-year roadmap. But it is looking at past gap assessments, past audits, pen tests, any documentation, all their policies, anything I can get my hands on, and that's kind of where it starts. But the framework that I'm using is the NIST CSF because it's already been laid out for me. So why reinvent the wheel, right? Okay, so are there any other questions? I didn't see any hands. Okay, so there's been a lot of new threats. This threat landscape just seems to keep continuing ever since COVID. So there was COVID, and then we had work from home we had to deal with, and then there was supply chain logistics. And so one of the things that we need to do in leadership roles or in risk roles is to look at all the risks to the business, figure out the risk appetite. And it's kind of hard sometimes because, I don't have an earthquake plan based out of Texas, so why would I have a plan on earthquake, right? And I'll say I did not have a pandemic plan before the pandemic, because when was the last pandemic? 1917. So just out of curiosity, how many of you had a pretty thorough pandemic plan before COVID?
I know she did.
Did you? Good for you. How many?
I can't take credit for that. I came in.
No, she came
during
in.
the
I came in.
pandemic.
It was there
It was-
before
yeah.
I was there.
Okay, so, but it was,
Yeah.
our business continuity plan.
And it was more than just honorable
focused,
mention?
Yeah, no, it
was a-
focused.
in
And
case
we
of
had
pandemic
a
pull here?
crisis committee, and we flipped the switch on March
So
16th
true.
and put in the pandemic plan.
Wow.
And
Good for you.
said, and it was pretty crazy because a couple of months later, we went back into the office, just a select few of us. There was still coffee and coffee mugs. I mean, people like packed up and got out and kept going. I mean, there was not one day, we did not lose one day of productivity. So,
Good for
yeah.
you. So how many people can say they have a pretty thorough pandemic response plan now? Okay. Yeah. What about,
Yeah, one question.
oh, is there a question? Yes, sir. Sorry.
Do you want to speak to that? Because you were,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
for business continuity.
It was kind of, it's like an addendum to the
Yeah.
BCP. So it was really kind of feathered in with the BCP, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, that's how we did it. Mine was an appendix that I added. So basically, with the BCP layout, I identify all the risks. And by the way, earthquake is listed, but I just rate the impact and likelihood is so low that I don't then have to move down to a more detailed plan in the appendix. But for those items that make the list, it's then a separate appendix. But you're right, a lot of the response plan is contained in the master BCP. Then the appendix just accounts for anything that's specific to that incident.
Yeah, but our BCP now accounts, we've tried to come up with every single scenario. And whether it is in the office like an active shooter, or if it's everybody stuck at home because the grid just went down. We went to the BCP last year when the grid went down here because we were without power and we're trying to make sure everybody's still connected. And so we were even noting, we have some people that are not in Texas and things like that. So yeah, we've tried to come up with everything from a bomb hitting in the middle of Dallas to, mass pandemic, things like that.
Very good.
So.
What about you, Jeff?
We haven't done a lot of that really in our organization as a whole. The general stuff that Jessica would say, but we certainly didn't have a pandemic plan of attack. As far as being ready for that kind of a challenge, though, we were pretty much set up. We've always made sure that VPN access, that we had more than enough. I use a term, bank level security. If any people that are at banks know I'm really not that good, but if you look at bank level security, right, try to do the best in every area you can and treat yourself from a security perspective like that. So when we're thinking about what could happen, with whatever the scenario might be, we're taking that into consideration across the board. I think to your question earlier on the endpoints at home and whatnot, I think endpoint detection response is much bigger now than it ever has been before. Educating folks to turn the VPN on when they're at home. A lot of people feel safe at home, right? They don't see why they would need that. Well, their kid in the room next door and his buddies on Discord, right? That could be a problem. So just educating people in this new world, a new way of living. And that's kind of the thing that I think carries me through on disasters and just how to do this kind of thing in the future.
And I think the one other thing that was kind of our aha moment as we were working through our BC plan is break class accounts. So you have to take into account if something goes down that you need to log in, who's going to be able to disable that security control to get in? And we were kind of caught in a catch-22, so we have actually assigned a list of people and break glass accounts that will bring down the security to get in the door.
So a follow-on question to that. So how did you tease that out? Did that come out in tabletop, or was that an actual experience that you had and you're like, oh wait, we didn't think about this?
Yeah, that came out during the shutdown on the grid.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah,
believe
if you
it.
can't log in, then who can get in to
Right.
check and see if it's still running, or
Yeah.
and I don't remember the specific
Right,
instance,
right.
but yeah, it's when we were all stuck at home and the grid
Wow.
went down.
Oh, wow.
And then of course the data center's right down the street from my house. I'm like, y'all okay over there? That's what they're in business for. So luckily they were good, but yeah, because we didn't know how much longer this was going to last. So day 6 hours is great, but day 4 we're starting to think, all right, how are we going to connect to the systems that we need to be connected to, that we're assuming that we will still be able to connect to? So yeah.
So my next question is, how do you convey these security risks to non-technical people, non-technical executives? I'm going to look to you, Raymond. What metrics would you recommend producing to convey these risks?
So I think that's probably the greatest challenge you have in most organizations, because historically I think we have presented, here's how many viruses we've blocked, here's how many things we've seen coming in via email, and it just doesn't connect, right? It's very difficult to make that connection with your senior leaders, because they're just hearing blah 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 blah. For us, the conversation really has to be about what is the impact to the business if something goes off the rails, right? And being able to sort of illustrate that by speaking specifically to direct scenarios, direct systems, what would happen if this happens? I'll use the example of something that happened relatively recently. How many people are aware that the San Francisco 49ers were breached 2 days before Super Bowl? Right? So in my current context, that would be a perfect way to talk to the business, right? What if this happened to us? We know exactly how long they were down for, and you can sort of extrapolate what's the impact on the organization. So it's really just having, one of the ways of doing this is having concrete examples that you can point to, or you can say that was the cost to the business, this is how much time was lost in terms of customer service or whatever that case may be. And again, we do have a lot more information today with, whether it's the IBM Ponemon data or it's Verizon data breach data, that kind of tells you where what potentially can happen, and then bringing it back, making it local for them. Within your business, what are the critical capabilities? For a company that's e-commerce, if you lose the ability to order, ship, sell, whatever it is, excuse me, is that an existential threat to the business? Is that essentially an extinction level event? If you can't ship product for a month, are you going to exist after that? Mm-hmm. And I think for smaller companies, that's really a challenge that they've got to identify. From a BCP perspective, that's going to be a high red flag. So just in terms of metrics, it's hard to stay away from the raw details about how many things you're actually blocking, et cetera. But I think it's making that conversation more relevant to what the business will understand. That's always going to resonate more.
So guys,
Very good.
who on the board during this process, whose stakeholders do you address? Like, do you have, mentorship, guidance? How often are you in board meetings? How much do you set that up?
I think typically your CFO is a good ally to have because they understand the financial impact. In many organizations, your CFO is either the de facto compliance officer or is playing that role. So having your general counsel and your CFO, if you've got those two people in lockstep with you, I think you're usually in pretty good shape. And they can provide really great guidance in terms of how we tailor the message. Because like I said, the last thing you want to do is communicate with your leadership and you're they've checked out. So they usually can tell you, here's how you need to position this or couch the message so that it resonates the most with your stakeholders.
Yeah.
Have they, from Jessica, have they allocated a budget? I mean, when was the budget allocated?
Yes. So the question's being asked, and I'm talking to the camera too. Hi, y'all. So we're talking about involvement with the board and the accountability of the board and how we're reporting to the board. I can tell you that a lot of boards now, and I'm on a board, are hiring cyber experts. So cyber used to be a slide or a light item during the risk committee meeting, and okay, let's talk about cyber. Now there are specific cyber risk committees on boards, and there are board members who have enough knowledge in technology and cyber to be asking questions to the CISO and to hold us accountable. If your board hasn't hasn't reached that yet. It's probably coming because it's happening more and more. So for me, the metrics that I'm producing to our board is what they want to hear. So I've asked them, am I giving you the right information? We do not go to the CVE level. I'm not talking about vulnerability management. But one of the things that I do show on what we're blocking is we all need to understand that we're all under attack. No company is so small or off the grid that we're not going to be targeted. Whether you're targeted through phishing or it's hitting your firewall or it's hitting your MFA, everybody is under attack. And that's one of the things I try to balance that, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD. But you've got to be able to convey that this is the reality. And this is why you're paying for me and my team and all the stack that I keep coming to you saying we might need a little bit more money, and here's the risk, and it's gonna be about $100,000, and here's the impact. And kind of what Raymond talked about too, it's a lot easier right now to sell a security program in 2022 than it was in 2015, because we have enough instances in your industry with companies just like us that got hit, and look what happened. Look how much it cost, look how long they were down, and that really does, it's like, yeah, it really could happen to us, and this is what it's going to look like.
From my perspective, when I'm trying to convey risk or the status of the security program to the board members who don't necessarily want to see that your firewall is getting hit by a million packets from Russia, that doesn't really mean anything to them. There's nothing to measure that. But what I do is I use the CMMI, Carnegie Mellon's Maturity Index, and I go through the entire range of all the different areas of security, and they can understand when they see security awareness training, vulnerability management, and you might have to explain a little bit what that is, but it's a scale of 0 to 5, and you can kind of show them where the program is immature, where it's lacking, and it's a little bit more easily digestible.
100%. I actually used that with the CSF. I delivered it in CMMI terms, and that particular company, they loved it. The CEO there, it made sense to him. He's like, well, what do we have to do to get this 2 to a 3? And I'm like, well, here's the list of things that we need to do. Here's the timelines. Here's the costs. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's a great tool. I'm glad you mentioned that.
And Jeff, what do you think?
I think, everybody at the board level, people are really growing in understanding our field. And in fact, it's shocking sometimes. I sat with a top guy here not too long ago, and the questions that he was asking were straight out of a CISO type magazine. Yeah. And I was really surprised because this person 5 years ago would not have even known anything. The verbiage that he was asking it really shocked me. I was blown away. One of the things that I think is important is, we all say know the business, right? You all say that. Know your current business, right? Because it's real easy when you're in our role. And I've been with Interstate 7 years, and in this role just a couple. But yeah, we know what we do in our business selling batteries. But do you really know what's passionate on your business as of right now for this quarter? So make sure that you take the time to talk to your business partners about what's really important on the table right now. Where are we really going right now as a business? And know that, because that can really add even a brighter spotlight, if you will, on what you're trying to convey to them if you're using something to compare that to. And also on metrics, that's another one that shocks me sometimes. I do a service catalog of metrics, and I have so many metrics that kind of would probably blow your mind. A lot of them will never see the light of day on any kind of report. I do that on purpose because I find that different executives want to see different things that honestly that we've not been taught. For instance, you hear that if you show this metric, it needs to tie into your budget, or so what, right? The so what approach. That's not always true. If you show a person a catalog, old JCPenney style, a catalog of all the different things that you can show them, I find that personally that I'm very surprised. I might have someone that says, could you get me a monthly report that shows how many attacks come out of that country? I can, but you're over marketing. Why? I don't tell them that, but I'm thinking in my head. But you know what? They get that in front of them, And then they will also look at the other things that really they probably ought to be looking at that we're all talking about. It's just a little marketing technique that I personally use, and it seems to get their attention because you're giving them something that they want. And oh, by the way, make sure you can actually deliver everything in your report catalog, because chances are they're going to want something you never dreamed they're going to want, or that takes 2 weeks of your person's time to build. You don't want those in your catalog, right? So that's just my thoughts.
And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with metrics because I've seen metrics produced that just show a number, phishing attack. We have this many employees click on phishing emails. You show it to an executive, and it's like, okay, next slide. What do they do with that, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to. My approach to metrics is I always have to provide context, and then I also provide a goal, and so I include those two things on all my metrics. So here's the context: is we had a 8% phishing failures. The industry average is 4%. Our goal is 1.5%. And then when they look at it, they go, okay, there's some work to do because for the last 3 months you've been averaging 10%, and you're telling me that's already above industry average, and your goal is. But without those things, it's just a number on a piece of paper, and I find that when you present metrics like that, you just get. Next slide. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
100% agree with that, because I've been in those situations, back earlier on in my career. There was a lot of that. This is what makes sense to me in my tunnel vision of dealing with this stuff every day. And you take that upstream, and they're like, okay, next. And there's no engagement, there's no questions, there's nothing. But what changed for me was when I started getting actual questions from the board. And they were more like, hey, I saw this thing on 2020 last night. Like, how exposed to that thing are we?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. So I started piecing things together and figuring out, okay, so if I can show them ahead of time that we're ahead of that stuff, or that we at least have pretty good mitigating controls in place to address that kind of thing, that's the stuff they were real interested in. So like when pen test time would come around, I always had a lot of fun because I would really engineer the pen test to show results that A, I wanted to learn, but B, I knew would show well to the board and would highlight areas where we needed to improve, or something that was really important to the business that they would be really in tune to, get really good engagement from them when you present it. So so I've kind of been all over the board with this stuff, even with the metrics,
Yeah. And it's tough when you're, if you don't have experience with metrics and you just try to go out and Google what metrics do I produce as a CISO, and it's been a while since I've done that, but most of the sites that come up are just the sheer number.
Yeah.
Show them the vulnerability numbers, show them the firewall attacks, and without the context or the goal setting, it's from most of the executives show it, it's just a number on a piece of paper.
So I think the example you gave a little while ago about phishing is a great one. Because yes, there is an average rate, right, 4%, that we're aiming for. And typically you're using two separate things to sort of gauge where the organization is. How many people are failing your phishing tests, and how many people are actually reporting the ones that you send out.
Yeah.
And essentially what we're saying is that we want to see the bad number go down and we want to see the good number go up.
Right.
And just in terms of a visual that you can present to the board, I think people intuitively will understand, here's what we're aiming for, and you can show the trends, one going down and one coming up.
Because you have that goal, yeah.
Because in today's world, I think the statistic was 84% of breaches in 2021 involved a human factor. That is a staggering number.
Yeah.
So awareness training, cybersecurity training is probably one of the best things we can sell to the boards or to executives in terms of, and maybe there isn't a huge cost in terms of what we pay for that service, but it means that they have to spend, in our case, 45 minutes a year doing that training, and then we're pushing out monthly Ninjios, right? It means that they have to take time from their day job, delivering business results, and do that. In some cases, business leaders are like, well, that's too much. Well, we need to make sure that they understand that if the human is the weakest link, then we have to make sure we're focusing on that. And I think in the previous session, we kind of talked about this as well, is that ransomware and phishing are the two greatest threats that we've got today and they come in through us. So, I think making these, whether it's metrics or just the story you're telling, relevant to the business context is the best way for us to be successful and to gain additional support from the board or your executives.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we're got 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we leave room for any final questions, but there's one question that I'm going to ask every panelist to answer. But before I do that, I want to say, are there any sponsors in the room today? There's not a single sponsor in here? Right. Okay. Well, I was going to say thank
Scared
you
'em off.
to our sponsors.
Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you to our sponsors.
You're somewhere.
The last question is really, what advice do we have for the sponsors today who might be trying to get their foot in the door with you? And I was actually talking to someone who's a friend of mine. I consider him a friend of mine. He's here today. I think he's in the room, but I'm not going to call him out. But I met him years ago at one of these conferences, and he's typically in a sales executive role. And I told him, I said, I don't take cold calls. I don't do it. I'll ignore the call. If I pick up the call and it's a cold call, I'll say I don't have time right now, and then I might block them actually. But and that's just the nature of the game. And one of the reasons is as a CSO or a CISO, I already know pretty much. I have my roadmap. I know the products I want. I'm familiar with a lot of the different tools out there, and so I already have preconceived notions about what I'm going to do and who I'm going to go to. But the reason I know that is because I come to these conferences and I meet the sponsors and I learn about, and then I develop relationships over a longer period of time. Hey, Barbara. And so those relationships, then I have people that I can go to. And I trust, and I say, I need this, I'm going to go to so-and-so. And in some cases, I've met him at a conference years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering what my colleagues here on the panel, what's your relationship? How often do you accept cold calls from vendors and third parties versus going with tried and true relationships that you've already had? Let's start on this end with
Sure.
Mr. Kirby.
Well, I don't usually take calls. I like email and texts and things like that. I just kind of almost have some people do that nowadays. They tell you, I have a don't call me policy. I kind of do because I just don't answer the phone. I don't usually have time. I think I got 20 attempts here, sitting here, and I won't ever answer any of them. But know the person, right? So I'm a very, very open, real transparent person. I'm out there on everything in social media, whether it be my music or me personally as a professional. And I would say to the vendors, know who you're talking to and figure that out and communicate with them on their language. Don't you heard I'm in a music world, right? The rock and roll thing. Okay, if you are absolutely never and not into rock and roll, please don't come to me and say, oh, I love like hard rock, like Leonard Skinner. Oh, yeah, because you just lost me because I know now you're just trying to sell me something, right? But if you do know that world, great. But if you don't, just know there's other facets of people. I like a person that ties into me, a vendor who really gets time to know what's Jeff really concerned with, what really keeps him up at night, and how could we have a synergy in getting to know each other, as strong business partners, and who knows, maybe even friends. I've got vendors that are personal friends of mine, and not all, but that's just my personal advice, and I think you're going to get a different answer from everybody, but that's what I like.
Yeah.
It goes beyond that. It goes to LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yep. Sure.
Cold message that hits you, and the first thing they want to do is meet and sell you.
Yeah.
First, the connection request. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and then immediately.
And then immediately trying to sell. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. What do you think, Travis? Do you take cold calls?
No.
Have you ever bought a product off a cold call? Have you ever bought a product off of a blind LinkedIn request? Well, he's having to think
Kind
about
of.
it.
I had to think about that. I mean, I don't think so, but maybe. Because I'm trying to think of all the relationships that I have and where those all originated. And some of them I've had for so long, I don't remember how it started. It may have been a cold call or something.
I'm going to put you down as a no, so my metrics are consistent. No.
You don't have room for maybe? There's
no maybe. Yes or no? What do you think,
Yeah.
Jessica?
No.
Any advice?
And y'all know I love you. Hi, Barbara. I'm kidding. Well, I had to say hi too. No, I do. I love our vendors. I really do. And I've made some really great connections and great relationships and great friendships. On average, When I end up doing a deal with a security solution, I have known you for 2 years. It's a 2-year pipeline. And I may or may not have changed jobs. And what I needed when I was at a company with 13,000 people and 230 locations, I don't need now when I'm at a company with 500 people and we're in a totally different industry. It doesn't mean that I don't love your solution, it's just not the right fit. So just be patient with us. But yeah, I can't, if I answered every single vendor call,
Right.
I would never get my work done. And the other thing is, I'm a VAR person. I work through my VARs, and the VARs have been really effective for me to do block and tackle and scheduling and things like that, because I don't have an admin. Wish I did. But so connect with your VARs, and we can kind of streamline this a little bit better too. But we absolutely love you guys, but can't take on everything.
So that's 4 no's. What do you
Yeah.
think, Raymond?
It's going to be a no.
Okay.
And yes, so in my current role, the advantage is that we inherit a lot of stuff from the league, so we don't really have to. But yeah, I get calls all the time. And the challenge today is that, it's just a number showing up on my phone, and there's so many spam messages. Number one, I don't have time, and number two, it's very difficult to just take the time to do it, right? What I think the sponsors should do, or the companies should do, and we know each other from NTXISSA. David and I met. I believe that's where we met the first time. Go to those organizations. Go to the professional organizations in the area. Sponsor a lunch. Talk to people. Because I've built relationships off of those, right? Answering questions, talking to them, recognizing that the value that they can bring, and then expanding out from that. The cold call just doesn't work for me personally. I'd love to see, them willing to put themselves out there, invest some time in researching something, providing us with solutions and options. To me, the educational part is great, especially if we're bringing people in our teams along to kind of grow them in their career. So for me, that's a much better approach.
I love it. Very good. Are there any other questions? We are just about out of time. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing based on your question.
Yes.
Okay? That's part of the gaps that Elevate Exchange is filling, right? If you come to an Elevate Exchange and our sponsors, we do have sponsors for Elevate Exchanges. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because what we're trying to do is have them stop throwing spaghetti against a wall. I'm just going to put it
Right,
that way,
right.
right?
I like that. Yeah.
Instead, you have to build those relationships. And you need those relationships with them as well, right? So don't avoid, but don't take cold calls, right? Go to those events, like Elevate Exchange. This is an Elevate Exchange. Go meet those sponsors and get to know them. Go have coffee with them, because I have a lot of them, just like they're friends that I have
Sure,
known. Barbara I've known for 10 years. Many people.
She's actually on the panel. Y'all just can't see her.
I forgot to throw questions.
But please, go to Elevate, go to events, get involved with the sponsors, get to know your IT people, your technology people. So that's the best way even to learn about new technologies. So anyway, I'm stepping in the middle of that because that was the perfect inroad. So
Good.
please support Elevate Exchange. I'm sorry, I need to be on. Jessica is great. These guys are great at supporting our online community. I kept telling them, I always forget, and I'm so sorry.
I will never forget you guys. Glad you could join us.
They're awesome.
Yeah.
And thank you also for being here. And let's give
Yeah.
our people our
Thank you.